Hello everybody, I am Anu Priya, Assistant Professor in Rai University, and today we will start the lecture series on TPA, Transfer of Property Act. So basically we are going to start with the property law. So let's get started. So in the first unit of Transfer of Property Act, we'll have the introduction part, kinds of property, general provisions, and so on. But in this slide, we'll cover the first two things, that is the introduction part and the kinds of property part. So when we come to the introduction part and we are about to start the Transfer of Property Act, so we must understand what the property is. So property term is a very generic term, and when we talk about the property, it is more related to the economic things. So here, as it we see, the word property has not been defined in the Transfer of Property Act, but the term property has been used in the most generic sense, and the property is a legal term to denote every kind of interest, and the set of interest is also known as rights, which has been economic content. So when we read the Transfer of Property Act, it basically deals with immovable property. You can see the movable property concept in some sections, some provisions, but the immovable property dealings are more prevalent in the Transfer of Property Act. So here we can see that there are different kinds of property. One is movable property, immovable property, tangible, intangible, intellectual property. There are certain more types of property as well, but here we will mostly focus on the movable and immovable property. So what are the objects of Transfer of Property Act? Basically, it is a very transparent and uniform codified law which has come under the Act of 1882. So what was there in previously before the 1882, there was also the dealing of the Transfer of Property Act, the transaction between the person for the sale and purchase of the transfer of properties. But after 1882, there was the unified and transparent laws to codify and compile the all laws in a certain set of series. So this is what the Transfer of Property Act deals with. And second is mutatis mutandis. This maxim basically means, for example, we can take the example of strict liability in the tort. So in India, there was no provisions like strict liability or absolute liability there, but internationally it was covered. So Justice Bhagwati, when it derived the provision of absolute liability, so it was basically derived by the strict liability concept. But further on, what happened, that there was certain modification, and with the modification it was implemented in India. So what it is basically the act implemented the existed law with necessary implementation according to the need of the place. The third is the act completed the contract law. So what was there in the Transfer of Property Act is basically the transaction between the person. For example, A is the owner of the property and he wanted to sell the property to B. So in this case, there is a contract between the person A and the person B. So what is this? This is a kind of contract. So what the TPA do is it actually supplement or complement the contract law. The next is the parallel to the intestate and testamentary law. What the intestate and testamentary law talks about? The intestate means that the person died without having been set up the wills and all. So if the person died leaving behind his property, the property will dissolve by the personal laws, Hindu law, Muslim law, Mohammedan law, Farsi laws, etc. These are the provisions for that. And testamentary law is about the will, the transfer of property by the will. So if a person set out the will before he dies, and after that the will is transferred to the person who succeeded, it is the testamentary law. So next slide is about scope of the TPA. So TPA is not exhaustive. TPA is not exhaustive. We can relate it to the IPC. If you have read IPC ever, so I presume that you know the IPC. So if you talk about section 300, murder. So murder is exhaustively dealt in the IPC. Murder, the provisions of murder are set out in section 300, whereas if punishment are there in section 302, and whereas the attempt to murder is also dealt in section 307. So this is the basically whole comprise of the murder. Everything is set over there in the murder. But in the TPA, it is not exhaustive. We have the supplementary laws for the transfer of the properties. And the other scope is the transfer mainly of immovable properties. As I earlier told you, the object is what? It is a transfer of the movable property is dealt in some of the general section, but it is mostly immovable property. Next is, it does not affect any inconsistent rule of Muslim personal law. So what this line is basically mean is that the Muslim personal law prevail over the Transfer of Property Act. This is also the scope of it. Geographical limitation, the place to place it differs, the laws differs from the different geographical areas. We will set the example of section 1. Before, there was no law in transfer of property law prevail in the Punjab and the Delhi and Mumbai, but later on some of the provision was by the gadget of the government set over there. So we will see in section 1 of that. Saving of certain incidents and rights. So as we earlier dealt with the Muslim personal laws, here the Muslim personal law prevails, so there are certain incidents and rights which are in the savings. Next slide deals with immovable property. So when we deal with immovable property, what is immovable property? So there are two types of property, as I earlier told you, movable property and immovable property. When we deal with immovable property, what the immovable property is, it is defined in section 3 of TPA Act, but it is in the negative sense. Whereas section 3 subsection 26 of the General Clause Act deals it in the positive sense. So under TPA it does not include standing timber and growing crops. Other than that, everything is movable property. Immovable property and General Clause Act shall include land, benefit arise out of land, and things attached to earth. We will further bifurcate it one by one. So what the land is? Land is the surface of earth. This is not limited till the surface of earth. The space over the land and the space beneath the land are also covered in the land. For example, there is a pond, lake and something else. These are also part of land. Whereas the benefit arise out of land is the benefit the one person who has the possession or interest over the land have this. For example, to right to enter into the land, it is kind of benefit arise out of land. Okay. So let's test things attached to the earth. For if there are some certain case laws for about benefit arise of the land, we will see in the next slide. And last is things attached to the earth. The things which are attached basically to the earth are things attached to earth. Basically there are three divisions and we will see in the next slide about it. So here, the second clause we have read, the benefit arise out of land. These are the case laws like Anand Behrar vs. State of Odisha and Santa Bai vs. State of Bombay. What is that? Here in the first thing, it was held that right to catch away the fish from the Chilka Lake over a number of years was held to be equivalent of profit appendre. So don't be confused by the term profit appendre. The profit appendre is basically mean benefit to arise out of the land. The Supreme Court held that the benefit which we arise out of the land is also a immovable property. For example, the right to catch away the fish from the water is also a kind of immovable property. So next is Santa Bai vs. State of Bombay. In this case, there was the right to enter into the land and carry away the woods like timbers basically. So here also it is a immovable property because there was a right to enter the land, cut and carry away for the period of 12 years. So these is the benefit arise of a land, or you can say the profit appendre. This is also a immovable property. So next slide we will see the other thing, the things attached to the earth. As we bifurcated it, the things rooted in the earth, the things embedded in the earth, and things attached to what is so embedded. So here we can also say it is a doctrine of fixtures because we fix something on the earth. So what is the things rooted in the earth? Basically, for example, a tree, its roots are attached to the earth. So this is things rooted in the earth. And the things embedded in the earth is what things embedded in the earth. For example, a building. We put the bricks over and bricks. These are actually things embedded to the earth. And the last is things attached to what is so embedded. So things attached what is so embedded is basically, For example, if a person goes to buy a house, you can see that there are doors and windows and ceiling fans all over there. So here what it is things attached to what is so embedded in the earth. If a person sees a house and wanted to purchase that house, you cannot remove the doors out and the windows out later on and say these are movable property, because they are the things which is attached to what is so embedded in the earth. Okay, let's move further slide, which is movable property. So basically the purpose of the thing is very important. If there is something with the purpose or intention which is put over there is to remove it out later on, so that will not come under the immovable property, because if we grow a timber, for example neem or sesame tree, what will happen later on? We'll cut it out and sell it in the market. So these are movable properties. The things which have an intention or purpose to be fixed for a period of time, then that will be immovable property, and the things which have the purpose to remove it out for after some time, that will be movable property. So movable property is basically defined under section 22 of IPC as well. Here it is defined as except land and things attached to the earth or permanently fastened to things, anything which is attached to the earth are movable property. Okay, and according to the General Clause Act as well, what is there? Shall means movable property. Shall means property of every description except immovable property. Everything except immovable property is a movable property. Here is the example. Movable is kind of gold, jewels, stocks and all, and immovable is house. So what are the differences we have came over till yet? So examples of movable property are there, like watch, computer, money, everything is movable. And what is immovable? The real estates, manufacturing plants, warehouse, land, everything is immovable property. Registration. When you come to the things of registration, in movable property, registration are basically not required, but in immovable property, it is required. Here I have given the example of value exceeded ₹100. So you can set example of section 54 of Transfer of Property Act. There is also there that if the property is more than of ₹100 value, you have to register for that. The next is inheritance can be partitioned easily, and it cannot be breakable or divisible easily. So in the case of inheritance, the movable property, it is kind of basically quite easier to transfer, but in case of immovable property, you have to follow certain protocols and all. And what are the transfer? Can be transferred easily, but in here, if we have to transfer a gift as well, so you have to make a registration, a proper documentation for the transfer of the immovable property. And if we use the movable property as a security, in the case of immovable property, it will be called as mortgage, lien and etc. But in case of movable property, it will be termed as pledge. So next slide. So here we come to the other kinds of property, that is tangible and intangible. Tangible are the things you can touch and intangible are the things you cannot touch. For example, machineries, building, vehicles are the tangible assets, whereas copyright, license, goodwills are intangible property. So what are intellectual property? These are very broadly can be seen in the today's term that intellectual properties are very outsourced after the outcome of the AIs as well. So what are the intellectual property rights? It's kind of copyright, patent, trademark, performance right, database, designs right, etc. Here we come to the end of transfer of property after today's lecture. We will move further in the unit 1. Okay, thank you so much.